Welcome again. Uh, Now we will be dealing with the computation of period of limitation. How the period of limitation will be computed. Sections 12 to 24. Sections 12 to 24 of the Limitation Act provides with the rules regarding the computation of the period of limitation with regard to suits, appeals or applications. Section 12 of the Act. Section 12 of the Act provides with certain exclusion of time while computing the period of limitation. Accordingly, while computing the period of limitation for any suit, appeal or an application, the day from which the period is to be reckoned, that will be excluded. For example, if cause of action for a case has arose on say first day of January, then that first day of January is to be excluded from that. For example, in a case that has been illustrated in a case that is in Webb versus Fair Manor. Webb versus Fair Manor is a decision of 1880. 1880 ILR 2 Madras 400. In this case, the illustration has been provided as to how the period is to be calculated. In this case, it was held that while computing the period of 2 months, in a case where certain goods were sold by one party to the other, by the plaintiff to the defendant, and the goods were sold on the 5th day of October, and there was a condition that the payment will be made within 2 months. So goods were sold on 5th day of October with a condition that the defendant will make the payment within 2 months. So while computing the period of the 2 months with regard to the date of payment, the court observed that the 5th day of October will have to be excluded from that. The 5th day of October on which day the goods were sold, that will have to be excluded while computing the date. And so itself, the amount will be due only on the expiration of 5th day of December. That is, the suit can be filed only on the 6th day of December. So it's in such a way the day on which the cause of action arose will have to be excluded. And while computing the period of limitation for an appeal or for an application for a leave to appeal, etc., or with regard to a revision of a judgment or order, a review of an order, in such cases also, the date on which the subject matter of appeal, the judgment or the order which is appealed against, or which has been against which the review has been filed, the day on which the judgment or order was pronounced, that will also have to be excluded. And when it comes to the day, in calculating the day also, if a copy of that judgment or an order is to be provided along with the appeal or the memorandum of revision or review, in such cases, the period taken for obtaining the copy will also have to be excluded. ഇപ്പോൾ ഒരു ജഡ്ജ്മെൻറ്റിന് എഗൻസ്റ്റ് ആയിട്ട് നമ്മളൊരു അപ്പീൽ കൊടുക്കുന്നു. അപ്പോൾ ആ കോപ്പി കിട്ടുവാൻ നമ്മൾ ആപ്ലിക്കേഷൻ കൊടുത്ത് അതിനുശേഷം ആ കോപ്പി കിട്ടുവാൻ എത്ര ദിവസം താമസമുണ്ടായോ, കോടതിയിൽ നിന്ന് കോപ്പി കിട്ടുന്നതിന് എത്ര ദിവസം താമസമുണ്ടായോ, ആപ്ലിക്കേഷൻ കൊടുത്ത ദിവസം മുതൽ ആ കോപ്പി കിട്ടുന്നതിനുണ്ടായ ആ ദിവസം വരെ, ആൻഡ് ദാറ്റ് പീരീഡ് ഓൾസോ വിൽ ഹാവ് ടു ബി എക്സ്ക്ലൂഡഡ് ഫ്രം ദാറ്റ്. So I have in your notes I have provided how it will be calculated, and you can go through the notes to calculate how it can be reckoned. And thirdly, if a decree or order which is appealed or which is sought to be reviewed, etc., the time requisite for obtaining the copy, as I have told you, the copy of the judgment will have to be excluded. And if it's an application to set aside the award, the time required for obtaining the copy of the award, that will also have to be excluded from while calculating the period of limitation. So it's not because of the fault of the party or the appellant or the petitioner that there is a delay in obtaining the copy. So if it is mandatory that the copy will have to be provided along with the memorandum of appeal, review or revision, etc. In such cases, the period which is required to obtain the copy, that will be excluded from the time. And there is an explanation which has been appended to section 12. And the explanation provides that while computing the period of the limitation, this time requisite, the time which has been required, that will have to be excluded. That's provided in the explanation appended to section 12. And in case of filing a suit or an appeal as a pauper, as an indigent person, the procedure or the calculation of the time, that has been provided under section 13. So if you want to file a suit as a pauper, the first step is to file an application. So file an application, file a petition, and which will be absolutely in the nature of a suit, which we will learn in the class of Code of Civil Procedure. So in computing the period of limitation, in the cases where the party files a suit or an appeal as a pauper, the period on which the application to sue as a pauper or the application to conduct the appeal as a pauper is filed, that date will be considered to be the date on which the suit or the appeal has been filed. In P. Sridevi versus P. Appu. In P. Sridevi versus P. Appu, AIR 1991, Kerala 76. AIR 1991, Kerala 76, P. Sridevi versus P. Appu. In this case, the High Court of Kerala has held that no time limit has been set out in section 13, and the court can extend the time at its discretion when the court finds that the party is not eligible to file the petition or the suit as an indigent person. So sometimes when a person has filed a suit or an appeal as an indigent person, the court may, upon conducting the inquiry with regard to the financial condition of that person, may come to a conclusion that he is not an indigent person. In such circumstances, he will be liable to pay the court fee, etc. And the usual procedure is that the court will provide with the time for filing the court fee, etc. And when such a time has been provided, whether the court is having the power to extend the time. And in this case, that is in P. Sridevi versus P. Appu, the court has held that no time limit has been put out in section 13, and if the court finds that it is appropriate to do so, having regard to the facts and circumstances of each and every case, the court may extend the time for producing the stamp paper, the court fee, etc. for the suit. And the court has observed that when a suit or an appeal is filed as an indigent person, that it will commence from the moment the application for permission has been filed. So it is presumed that on the date on which the application to sue as an indigent person has been filed, the person has filed the suit. And if the applicant is intending to file a fresh suit, the procedure is that the applicant can convert the petition into a suit, and after paying the requisite court fee, when the court finds that he is not eligible to file the suit or appeal as an indigent person. But assume for a moment the applicant is filing a fresh petition. So the court found that the applicant who has filed an application to sue as an indigent person is not entitled for that, and the court asked the person to produce or to file the requisite court fee for the suit. But instead of that, if the person is filing a fresh suit, he will not be entitled to the benefit. He will be entitled to the benefit only if he is converting that indigent petition into that of a suit. If he is filing a fresh petition, the period of limitation will have to be calculated from the date on which the cause of action arose, and if the period of limitation has expired, it cannot be condoned by the court, because section 5 is not applicable with regard to a fresh suit. But as I have told you, if a person has been bona fide proceeding the suit in a proceeding the case in a wrong court, in a court which does not have the jurisdiction to entertain the particular suit, that situation is provided under section 14. What is the rule to be applied in such situations? That is provided under rule 14. ഒരാൾ തെറ്റായ ഒരു കോടതിയിൽ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ തെറ്റായ ഒരു ട്രൈബ്യൂണലിലാണ് കേസ് ഫയൽ ചെയ്തുകൊണ്ടിരുന്നത്, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ആ പോയ സമയം, if he is bona fidely prosecuting it, section 14 provides that the time during which the plaintiff was prosecuting the civil proceeding with due diligence in a court which did not have the jurisdiction, that shall be excluded in computing the period of limitation if he was conducting the suit bona fide. So if he was conducting the suit bona fide in a good faith before a wrong court, the days up to which the proceedings were pending before that wrong court, that will be excluded while calculating the period of limitation. Section 14 further provides that the time during which the applicant was prosecuting the application with due diligence in a court which did not have the jurisdiction, that also can be exempted. So this will be applicable with regard to a fresh suit also. Even if the party was prosecuting a fresh suit before a court which did not have the jurisdiction, this will be applied irrespective of the provisions contained under section 5 of the Limitation Act. And for that purpose, the day on which the suit was filed before the wrong court, that will have to be excluded. And certain conditions are also provided to attract section 14. They are that both the prior and subsequent proceedings, that must be civil proceeding. If the person was conducting a criminal proceeding, for example, a suit based upon a check which has been disordered, the party was conducting a proceeding under section 138 of the criminal procedure code in a criminal court, in a magistrate court. And later on he is filing a civil suit before a civil court. In such cases, he will not be entitled for the benefits. He ought to have filed the civil suit, because one proceeding is a criminal in nature and the other is a civil in nature. The first condition is that both the proceedings, the prior suit and the subsequent suit, both the proceedings, that must be a civil proceeding. And the prior proceeding should have been initiated within the period of limitation. So the party should have filed the suit before the wrong court within the period of limitation as provided under the Limitation Act. Thirdly, the prior proceeding, that should have been conducted with due diligence. So even after exercising the due diligence, the plaintiff had filed and proceeded with the suit before a wrong court. Again, the plaintiff has withdrawn the prior proceedings. The party has withdrawn the prior proceeding due to the defect of jurisdiction or any other cause of a like nature. So if it is withdrawn for some other cause, when it is withdrawn, it should be clearly withdrawn by stating the reason that because it has been wrongly prosecuted before a wrong court, I may be allowed to withdraw the suit. Or if it is of a like nature, that period will be exempted. And the proceedings, both the proceedings must be with regard to the same subject matter also. If the prior proceeding was with regard to one subject matter and the subsequent proceeding is, if it is with regard to some other matter, in such cases this exclusion will not be applicable. And both the proceedings, that must be in a court also. That is one in tribunal and court, that's not allowed. So these are the general principles with regard to exclusion of time with regard to filing of a suit before a wrong court. So these principles will have to be applied, and there are certain case laws also on that aspect. In Commissioner of Sales Tax versus Person, Tools and Plants, Kanpur. Commissioner of Sales Tax versus Person, Tools and Plants. In this case, the citation is year 1975 Supreme Court 1039. Year 1975 Supreme Court 1039. In this case, the Supreme Court observed that Section 5 to 14 of the Limitation Act cannot be made to apply for the proceedings under the UP Sales Tax Act. Why? Because one is a tribunal and the other is a court. So the proceedings under the Act, that has to be filed before the tribunal, and a civil suit is filed before a court. Because one is a tribunal and the other is a court, sections 5 to 14 will be of no application. So the other causes which has been mentioned in section 14, that should have some relation with the jurisdictional aspect also. And a difference between section 13 and section 14. Section 13 and the section 14, that has been pointed out by the High Court of Kerala in P. Sridevi versus P. Appu. And the court has observed that exclusion of limitation provided under section 13 is different from that which has been provided under section 14. Section 13 is applicable when a petition has been filed to sue as an indigent person or to file an appeal as an indigent person. Court observed that what is excluded in section 14 is the time during which another civil proceeding was prosecuted with due diligence and relating to the same matter in issue, and the party was prosecuting it in a good faith. But what is contemplated under section 13, that does not involve with regard to any inability of the court to entertain the suit. It is only with regard to entertaining the suit, application or appeal as an indigent person. So there is a difference between sections 13 and 14. In section 13, he ought to have filed the suit before the court. In section 13, the petition before the court to sue as an indigent person. But in section 14, when it comes, the party has been prosecuting the case before a wrong forum, a wrong court, which did not have the jurisdiction, and the matter has been withdrawn only due to the issue of jurisdiction of the court where the suit has been prosecuted bona fide in good faith. Section 15 provides with the exclusion of time with regard to other cases which are not covered under sections 13, 14, etc. So section 15 provides that if a suit or application for execution is stayed by way of an injunction or by way of an order of a court, the time of continuance of the injunction will have to be excluded. 15 clause 1 says that. So assume for a moment a decree has been passed and the period of limitation has been fixed for executing the decree, say for 12 years. But the person who has been aggrieved by the decree, he has filed an appeal and the appellate court has ordered stay for the proceeding, and the stay continued for a period of 15 years. So by the time when the stay has been vacated, the period of limitation is otherwise over. So in such cases, the period during which the decree was stayed by the court will be excluded in calculating the period of limitation. And this will be applicable in cases where the stay is partial also. If only one part of the decree has been stayed also, then also this provision will be equally applicable. And section 15.2 deals with cases where a mandatory notice has to be provided. For example, section 80 of the Code of Civil Procedure mandates that before instituting a suit against the government, a notice period, it provides with a notice period of 2 months. No suit shall be instituted against the government or against a public officer in respect of any act purporting to be done by such public officer in his official capacity until the expiration of 2 months after the notice in writing has been delivered to that to the government or the public officer. So in such cases also, that notice period will have to be excluded in calculating the period of limitation. Thirdly, Section 15, Clause 3. Section 15, Clause 3 provides that for a suit or an application for execution of a decree by a receiver appointed in the proceedings, etc. So when a receiver is appointed, in such cases, or with regard to the winding up of a company by the official liquidator, the period which begins from the date of the institution of such proceeding and the date on which the proceeding has come to an end, along with 3 months' time, will have to be excluded from the period of limitation. ഒരു റിസീവറെ അപ്പോയിൻറ്റ് ചെയ്യാൻ ആപ്ലിക്കേഷൻ വെച്ചിട്ടുണ്ട്. അപ്പോൾ റിസീവറെ അപ്പോയിൻറ്റ് ചെയ്ത് റിസീവർ ചുമതല ഏറ്റെടുത്തതിന് ശേഷം മാത്രമേ ആ കേസ് ഫയൽ ചെയ്യാവുന്ന ഒരു സാഹചര്യം ഉണ്ട് എങ്കിൽ, ഇൻ സച്ച് കേസസ് ആ പ്രൊസീഡിങ് റിസീവറെ അപ്പോയിൻറ്റ് ചെയ്യാനുള്ള പ്രൊസീഡിങ്സ് പെൻഡിങ്ങിലിരുന്ന സമയവും അത് തീരുമാനമായതിനു ശേഷം പിന്നീട് ഒരു 3 മാസം കഴിയുന്ന സമയവും കൂടി ഈ പീരീഡ് ഓഫ് ലിമിറ്റേഷനിൽ ഒഴിവാക്കി പോകേണ്ടതാണ്. ദാറ്റ് വിൽ ബി എക്സ്ക്ലൂഡഡ്. Section 15(4) provides that while computing the period of limitation for a suit for possession by a purchaser of a property in a sale in execution through a decree or a court, the time during which the proceedings to set aside the sale has been filed. If a petition has been filed to set aside the sale, then that period also will have to be excluded. So with certain conditions which are provided under Section 15 Clause 4, that will have to be complied with. Section 15(5), coming to Section 15(5). Section 15(5) provides that the time during which the defendant was absent from India, and from the territories outside India, or which are under the administration or the control of the central government, that also can be excluded. It's because for filing a suit, it is necessary that there should be an opposite party, there should be a defendant. So if the defendant was outside India during the period of limitation, then that period can also be period for which the defendant was outside India, that can also be excluded. And if the defendant was a person who has never been in India, had the defendant been in India but he had left India to some other foreign countries, this provision will come into application. Assume for a moment the defendant was never been in India. In such cases, this provision is of no application. If the defendant has not been in India for any time, then this period of exclusion of the time for which he was outside India is of no application. The High Court of Kerala in P.J. Johnson and Sons versus Astrophil Armadon SA. In this case, what happened was that the suit was one for recovery of money for certain goods goods and services which were supplied to a ship, and the ship was owned by a foreign corporation, and that foreign corporation did not have any office in India. The foreign corporation which owned the ship had no office in India, and the suit is one regarding the recovery of money which has been spent for providing certain goods and services to that ship. In this case, because the foreign corporation against which the suit has been filed, it did not have an office in India, it's presumed that the defendant was at no time in India, and so it was held that in such cases the extension of period of limitation is of no application. And the court held that because it was not filed within the specified time, the suit is barred by the law of limitation. So these are the provisions which have been provided under Section 13, 14 and 15 with regard to exclusion. 13, 14 and 15 with regard to the exclusion of time. Now we will come to see what would be the effect of limitation. what would be the effect of limitation? Or what would be the, first we will see with regard to section 16 dealing with the effect of death of the party. Effect of death of the party before the accrual of the right. So only when the right to sue arises, a person can file a suit. And if the person is no more before the right accrues, what will be the position? Section 16 provides that in such cases, if the person would have a right to file a suit if he was alive, but unfortunately he is no more. In such cases, the situation is with regard to two. In a case where the plaintiff expires before the right to sue accrues, firstly. Secondly, a situation where the defendant expires before the right to sue accrues. And in such cases, what will have to be done, that is dealt with under section 16. And underlying principle of section 16, as I have told you, is that in order to file a suit, there should be a person against whom a suit can be filed. And to file a suit, there should also be a person who can file the suit. So in the absence of a person who can file the suit, or in the absence of a person against whom the suit is to be filed, the suit could not be filed. And in order to attract section 16, the precondition is that the right to sue accrue after the death of that person, or the person should have died before the right to the institute the suit, or to right to file the suit arises. And if the right to sue has arose during the lifetime of the deceased person, the limitation will run from the date on which the right has accrued. The situation was discussed by the Allahabad High Court in a case that is in Rajo Bibi versus Chotelal. Rajo Bibi versus Chotelal, 1996, AIHC, All India High Court cases, 3493, Allahabad. The Allahabad High Court, in this case, it was held that if after executing a mortgage by conditional sale, in the case, it was a death of a person after executing a mortgage by conditional sale, the mortgager died. If the mortgager died before the period of reconveyance expired, തിരിച്ചെഴുതി കൊടുക്കേണ്ടതിന് മുമ്പേ മോർഗേജർ മരിച്ചു പോയെങ്കിൽ, in view of section 16 clause 1, the period of limitation would be computed from the time when the legal representative of the deceased became capable of instituting the suit for redemption of mortgage. So at the time of the death of that person, if his legal representatives, they were minors, at that time the suit could not be instituted. Only upon he attaining the majority, the suit could be instituted, and the time will run only from that period when there is a person to file a suit. കേസ് കൊടുക്കാൻ ഒരാളുണ്ടാകണം, കേസ് കൊടുക്കാൻ സാധിക്കുന്ന രീതിയിലുള്ള ഒരു ലീഗലി കോമ്പറ്റൻ്റ് ആയിട്ടുള്ള ആളുണ്ടാകുന്നത് വരെ ഉള്ള സമയം, that will remain there. Then what would be the effect of this is with regard to when the person is a person who can sue, or a person against whom the suit is to be filed is no more. But what would be the case with regard to a case where there is a fraud or a mistake? Fraud or a mistake, a bona fide mistake or a fraud. In such cases, section 17 of the Act will come into force. Section 17 of the Act deals with, provides with 4 conditions also. There, one is that there should be a fraud committed by the defendant. There should be a fraud committed by the defendant. The defendant should have committed the fraud. Or the knowledge of the right on which the suit or application founded is concealed by way of a fraud by the defendant. എനിക്ക് കേസ് കൊടുക്കാനുള്ള ഒരു സാഹചര്യമുണ്ട് എന്നുള്ളത് ഒരു ഫ്രോഡ്, ഒരു വഞ്ചനാപരമായ നടപടിയിലൂടെ ഡിഫൻഡൻറ്റ് എന്നിൽ നിന്നും മറച്ചു വെച്ചിരിക്കുന്നു. രണ്ടാമത്തെ സിറ്റുവേഷൻ. The third situation is the suit or application is arising out of a consequence of a mistake. ഒരു മിസ്റ്റേക്കിൽ നിന്നാണ് ഈ സ്യൂട്ടിനുള്ള അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ആ റിലീഫിനുള്ള കാര്യങ്ങൾ ഉണ്ടാകുന്നത്. ആൻഡ് ദാറ്റ് മിസ്റ്റേക്ക് വാസ് has not come to the notice of the plaintiff. And fourthly, the documents, in cases where documents are required to establish the claim, but such documents which are necessary to establish the claim or necessary to establish the right of the plaintiff has been fraudulently concealed from the plaintiff, has been fraudulently concealed from the plaintiff by the defendant. എനിക്ക് ഏതെങ്കിലും ഒരു പ്രത്യേക ഡോക്യുമെൻ്റ് ഉണ്ട് എന്നറിയാമായിരുന്നെങ്കിൽ എനിക്ക് കേസ് കൊടുക്കാൻ സാധിക്കുമായിരുന്നു. പക്ഷേ പ്രതി എന്നെ വഞ്ചിക്കണമെന്നുള്ള ഉദ്ദേശത്തോടു കൂടി ഈ ഡോക്യുമെൻ്റ് എന്നിൽ നിന്ന് മറച്ചു വച്ചിരിക്കുന്നു. ആൻഡ് ഫിഫ്ത്ലി, ഇറ്റ് envisages a situation with regard to execution proceedings. If the judgment debtor has prevented the execution of a decree by way of fraud or force, വഞ്ചനാപരമായ എന്തെങ്കിലും നടപടിയിലൂടെ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഒരു ഫോഴ്സ് എക്സർസൈസ് ചെയ്തുകൊണ്ടോ എന്നെ എക്സിക്യൂഷൻ പ്രൊസീഡിങ്സ് ഇനിഷ്യേറ്റ് ചെയ്യുന്നതിൽ നിന്ന് തടഞ്ഞിട്ടുണ്ട് എങ്കിൽ, that period under which I was unable to file the suit for these reasons, that can be excluded from the period of limitation, and that period will be extended. Not exclusion, that period will be extended with regard to filing of the suit. That is with regard to extension of filing of the suit. And this extension as provided under section 17, that will be available only if, or it will be available only against a person who is guilty of fraud or mistake, who is guilty of fraud or who is guilty of committing the mistake. The defendant should have committed the fraud. Secondly, the defendant should have fraudulently concealed the document upon which the plaintiff had his right to file the suit. And thirdly, if a person who is claiming through such person other than a bona fide purchaser is for a valuable consideration, അപ്പോൾ ഈ സാഹചര്യങ്ങളിൽ വാല്യുബിൾ കൺസിഡറേഷനിൽ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ബോണഫൈഡായിട്ട് വാങ്ങിച്ച ഒരാൾക്കെതിരായിട്ട് ഈ എക്സ്റ്റൻഷൻ ലഭിക്കില്ല. അപ്പോൾ ഈ മൂന്ന് സാഹചര്യങ്ങളിൽ മാത്രമാണ് എക്സ്റ്റൻഷൻ ലഭിക്കുന്നത്, ആസ് പ്രൊവൈഡഡ് അണ്ടർ സെക്ഷൻ 17 of the Act. So now assume for a moment a period of limitation is about to expire. At that time I am approaching the defendant with regard to say for example a suit for money. The defendant had obtained a loan from me and the period of limitation is about to expire. On that date I am approaching the defendant. He says that as of now I am unable to pay you the money back, but he acknowledges that he will pay the amount within the period of limitation. The acknowledgement should be within the period of limitation. In such cases, if an acknowledgement of liability is made in writing and signed by the person before the expiration of the period of limitation, section 18 envisages the situation wherein the person acknowledges the debt in writing and signed by him, and that acknowledgement must be within the period of limitation. In such case, a fresh period of limitation will have to be computed from the date on which the acknowledgement has been signed. So in such cases, a fresh period of limitation will commence from the date on which the acknowledgement has been signed. Please take notice that such acknowledgement must be within the period of limitation. The acknowledgement must be in writing. The acknowledgement must be signed. These are the conditions required to attract section 18. In order to attract section 18, the acknowledgement must be in writing. It must be signed by the person who is acknowledging, and that acknowledgement should be within the period of limitation. And that acknowledgement which is made within the period of limitation, that would that would grant a fresh period of limitation from the date on which such acknowledgement is made. അപ്പോൾ ആ പീരീഡ് ഓഫ് ലിമിറ്റേഷൻ തീരുന്നതിന് മുമ്പാണ് ഈ അക്നോളജ്മെൻറ്റ് എനിക്ക് ലഭിച്ചിട്ടുള്ളത് എങ്കിൽ അത് എഴുതപ്പെട്ട് ആ എഴുതിയതിൽ സൈൻ ചെയ്തിട്ടുള്ള അക്നോളജ്മെൻറ്റ് ആയിരിക്കണം. വാക്കാലുള്ള അക്നോളജ്മെൻറ്റ് പോരാ. അക്നോളജ്മെൻറ്റ് ഷാൽ നോട്ട് ബി ഓറൽ, ഇറ്റ് ഷുഡ് ബി ഇൻ റൈറ്റിംഗ് ആൻഡ് സൈൻ ബൈ ദി പേഴ്സൺ. If these conditions are satisfied, a fresh period of limitation will commence from the date on which the acknowledgement has been made. If it is not made within the period of limitation, the benefit of section 18 will not be available. And for the purpose, a mere acknowledgement is sufficient, even though the property has not been specifically detailed in the acknowledgement. എഴുതിയപ്പെട്ടാൽ മതി, അതിന് വലിയ വിശദാംശങ്ങളൊന്നും വേണ്ട, തരാനുള്ള പൈസ തരുന്നു എന്ന് എഴുതിയാൽ മാത്രം മതി. But it should be within the period of limitation. And then this is with regard to an express acknowledgement. Section 18 is providing with regard to an express acknowledgement made in writing within the period of limitation. Then section 19. Section 19 provides with a situation with regard to payment on account of debt or interest. അപ്പോൾ ഈ ഇതിനിടയ്ക്ക് കുറച്ച് പൈസ കൊണ്ട് തന്നാൽ, മുതലിലേക്കോ പലിശയിലേക്കോ ഉള്ള ഇനത്തിലേക്ക് കുറച്ച് പൈസ കൊണ്ട് തന്നാൽ, വാട്ട് വിൽ ബി ദി ഇഫക്റ്റ്? Section 19 deals with the situation, and Section 19 provides that the effect of payment on account of a debt or interest on legacy. So if a payment is made on account of a debt or of interest on a legacy before the expiration of the prescribed period by the person who is liable to pay, payment made by the person who is liable to pay the debt, a fresh period of limitation would start. അപ്പോൾ ഒരാൾക്ക് 1,00,000 രൂപ കൊടുക്കാനുണ്ട്. അതിൻ്റെ ലിമിറ്റേഷൻ പീരീഡ് കഴിയുന്നതിന് മുൻപായി ഒരു 50,000 രൂപ കൊണ്ട് കൊടുത്താൽ, a fresh period of limitation will start from that date on which the payment has been made. So in order to constitute an acknowledgement under Section 18, it is necessary that it should be in writing and it should be signed by the person also. But with regard to Section 19, it is sufficient that the payment is recorded. For an acknowledgement under Section 18, it should be in writing, it should be signed by the person who is acknowledging the debt. But when it comes to Section 19, if a payment is made, that will provide with a fresh period of limitation. If the debtor has endorsed in a book, on the back of the book, that he has paid the amount, then that will amount to a fresh period of limitation. But assume for a moment, എനിക്ക് ഒരാൾ ഈ പറഞ്ഞ പോലെ 1,00,000 രൂപ എനിക്ക് തരാനുണ്ട്. ഞാൻ ഇദ്ദേഹത്തോട് ലിമിറ്റേഷൻ പീരീഡിന് മുമ്പ് ചോദിച്ചു, തന്നില്ല. അക്നോളജ് ചെയ്യാൻ പറഞ്ഞു, ചെയ്തില്ല. അപ്പോൾ ഞാനൊരു കാര്യം ചെയ്തു, ഇയാൾ എനിക്ക് എഴുതി തന്നിരിക്കുന്ന ഒരു പ്രോമിസറി നോട്ടാണ്. ഞാൻ അതിൻ്റെ പുറകിൽ ഞാൻ എഴുതി വെച്ചു, ഈ പ്രോമിസറി നോട്ടിലേക്ക് വരേണ്ട തുകയിൽ 1,00,000 രൂപയിൽ നിന്നും 10,000 രൂപ ഇന്നേ ദിവസം എനിക്ക് നൽകിയിരിക്കുന്നു. Whether this part payment would revive or will provide a fresh period of limitation. ഞാൻ തന്നെ എഴുതി വയ്ക്കുകയാണ്, എനിക്ക് പൈസ ആക്ച്വലി ഐ ഹാവ് നോട്ട് റിസീവ്ഡ് എനി എമൗണ്ട്, ഹി ഹാസ് നോട്ട് പെയ്ഡ് മീ എനി എമൗണ്ട്, ബട്ട് ഫോർ ഗെറ്റിംഗ് ദ പീരീഡ് ഓഫ് ലിമിറ്റേഷൻ എക്സ്റ്റെൻഡഡ് I am endorsing that he has paid me 10,000 rupees and I am accounting the 10,000 rupees on a day prior to the date on which the limitation is expired. The period of limitation expires. Such a situation was addressed by the Punjab and Haryana High Court in Today Stationers and Gift Center versus Today Stationers and Gift Centers versus Allahabad Bank. In this case, the High Court of Punjab and Haryana, year 2004, Punjab and Haryana 56. In this case, it was held that a mere entry of interest by the bank, would not stop the running of time. ബാങ്ക് പൈസ കിട്ടി എന്ന് കാണിച്ചത് കൊണ്ട് മാത്രം ലിമിറ്റേഷൻ ആക്ടിന് അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ദ പീരീഡ് ഓഫ് ലിമിറ്റേഷൻ വിൽ നോട്ട് എക്സ്റ്റെൻഡ്, ബിക്കോസ് സച്ച് എൻട്രീസ് ആർ നോട്ട് ബേസ്ഡ് അപ്പോൺ എ മ്യൂച്വൽ ട്രാൻസാക്ഷൻ ആൻഡ് ഇറ്റ് ഇസ് ആസ് എ റിസൾട്ട് ഓഫ് ആൻ യൂണിലാറ്ററൽ ആക്ഷൻ. ഇപ്പോൾ ഞാൻ നേരത്തെ പറഞ്ഞ കേസിലെ പോലെ ഞാൻ മാത്രം എഴുതി വയ്ക്കുകയാണ്, ആൻഡ് ദ ഡിഫൻഡൻറ്റ് is not having any knowledge of the payment which has been made. So it will be of no application with regard to an unilateral statement which has been made. There should be evidence to the effect that the payment has been made by the defendant. Unless there is an evidence to that effect, the provision will be not applicable also. And then assume for a moment the payment is made by another person. Actually, Mr. X owed me the sum, but Mr. Y is making payment on behalf of X. Without any authorization from X, Y is making some payment to me. ഇപ്പോൾ ഞാൻ നേരത്തെ പറഞ്ഞ കേസിൽ ഒരു 10,000 രൂപ എനിക്ക് എക്സിന് വേണ്ടി തന്നു എന്ന് വൈ എനിക്ക് എഴുതി തരികയാണ്. അപ്പോൾ ഞാൻ നോക്കിയപ്പോൾ സെക്ഷൻ 19 അനുസരിച്ചിട്ട് ഞാൻ എഴുതിയത് കൊണ്ട് യാതൊരു വിലയില്ല. അപ്പോൾ ഞാൻ വയ്യെ വിളിച്ചിട്ട് പറഞ്ഞു, എക്സിന് വേണ്ടി ഈ പൈസ ഞാൻ ഏൽപ്പിക്കുന്നു എന്ന് എഴുതിത്തരാൻ പറഞ്ഞു. ഡെറ്റ് ടെക്നോളജി എന്നാൽ ഈ പൈസ തന്നു എന്ന് മാത്രം എഴുതിത്തരാൻ വേണ്ടി പറഞ്ഞു, ടു അട്രാക്ട് സെക്ഷൻ 90. ആൻഡ് വൈ മേക്സ് ആൻ എൻഡോഴ്സ്മെൻറ്റ് ദാറ്റ് ഹി ഈസ് പേയിങ് ഇറ്റ് for Mr. X. And section 20 provides that if it is without the knowledge of that person, without due authorization of that person, if it is made, that will also be of no any effect. In case of a person, if it is made by another person, if it is not on his behalf, was authorized by that person, that will not be having any legal validity for the purpose of extension of period of limitation. And such a situation was dealt with under S. Vellaya Gounder versus R. Venkatesa Chettiar. S. Vellaya Gounder versus R. Venkatesa Chettiar, 1968 to MLJ 101. In this case, it was held that the mere fact that the persons are partners does not make one partner liable under the acknowledgement by the other. But if the acknowledgement is in the course of a partnership business, it will be binding. So if there is no due authorization for that, and if a person is simply coming and making a payment without due authorization, that will not be binding upon the principal debtor, and the limitation period will not be extended also. Then coming to Order 1 Rule 10 of this Order 1 Rule 10 of CPC, which you have studied, regarding substitution or addition of new plaintiff or defendant. So Order 1 Rule 10 deals with that situation. What will be the consequence when a new plaintiff has been added to a suit, or when a new defendant has been added to a suit? When will the period of limitation run against such person? That has been dealt with under Section 21 of the Limitation Act. And Section 21 provides that in case of an addition or substitution of parties, after the institution of the suit, with regard to such person who has been later on added or substituted, it will be deemed that the suit is instituted by that person or against that person on the date on which such person was made a party. So if a new plaintiff is added, the suit will be deemed to have been instituted by that plaintiff when he was made a party to that suit. But if the plaintiffs are having a joint cause of action, in such cases also the plaintiff will have to be impleaded within the period of limitation. If it is not impleaded within the period of limitation, the suit will be of no value with regard to such plaintiff, and a defendant also cannot be added. The suit will be barred against a defendant who has been added after the date of period of limitation. അപ്പോൾ ലിമിറ്റേഷൻ പീരീഡിന് ശേഷം ഒരു പുതിയ വാദി വന്നാൽ ആ വാദിയെ സംബന്ധിച്ച് വാദി അതിലുള്ളതായി കണക്കാക്കേണ്ടതില്ല. അതിനുശേഷം ഒരു പ്രതി ലിമിറ്റേഷൻ പീരീഡിന് ശേഷമാണ് ഒരാളെ ഇംപ്ലീഡ് ചെയ്ത് പ്രതിയാക്കുന്നത് എങ്കിൽ the suit will be barred by limitation against that defendant also. But the proviso to section 21. Proviso to section 21 addresses a situation when the court is satisfied that the omission to include the new plaintiff or defendant that was due to a mistake which has occurred in good faith. In such cases, proviso to section 21 provides that the court may direct that the suit as regards such plaintiff or defendant shall be deemed to have instituted on any earlier date. അപ്പോൾ ഒരു അബദ്ധം പറ്റി എന്തെങ്കിലും ഒരു അബദ്ധം കൊണ്ട് ഒരു മിസ്റ്റേക്ക് കൊണ്ടൊക്കെയാണ് എങ്കിൽ, ബോണഫൈഡ് മിസ്റ്റേക്ക് കൊണ്ടാണ് ഇയാളെ പാർട്ടിയാക്കാൻ പറ്റാതെ പോകുന്നത് എങ്കിൽ what to say, the court can make an order, the court may make an order saying that the suit has been instituted against such party or instituted by such party on a prior date, only if it is arising out of a bona fide mistake. Then coming to section 22. Section 22 provides with the continuing breaches of contract and tort. If the breach of contract or tort it is continuing, every day on which the breach continues or the tort exists, a fresh cause of action arises and a fresh period of limitation will also arise. So in case of a continuing breaches of contract or tort, a fresh limitation will begin on each day the new cause of action arises. This continuing tort means a continuing wrong. The wrong should continue. A wrong should continue. Only if the wrong is continuing, then it will be treated as a continuing tort. For example, infringement of a trademark. Infringement of a trademark, it is a continuing wrong, and so the defendant cannot come and take a contention that on the first day we had infringed, the cause of action has arose and now the suit is hit by limitation. It is if it is continuing, if the wrong is continuing, each and every day a new cause of action will arise and it will not be barred by limitation. So this is the position with regard to continuing breaches of contract and continuing tort. And section 23, coming to section 23. Section 23 provides with a condition or provides with an instance where the compensation for acts which are not actionable without a special damage. റോങ് ഉണ്ടായി, പക്ഷേ ഒരു സ്പെഷ്യൽ ഡാമേജ് ഇല്ലാതെ സൂട്ട് കൊടുക്കാൻ സാധിക്കില്ലാത്ത കേസിലാണെങ്കിൽ the right to sue will accrue only upon happening of that special damage, and the period of limitation will have to be counted not from the date on which the wrong was committed, but on the date when the special damage has occurred. So there are only very limited number of cases which may come under that. In a case that is in Bhajan Singh Hardit and Company versus Caron Agency, this is a case where the court held that there is no need for a special damage, and that is the case in Bhajan Singh Hardit and Company versus Caron Agency. In this case, it was held that if a buyer refuses to take delivery, if a buyer refuses to take delivery of a goods and the goods were resold, the cause of action for the suit to recover the shortfall of amount ഒരാൾ വാങ്ങിക്കാമെന്ന് പറഞ്ഞു, ആ സാധനം അയാൾ വാങ്ങിച്ചില്ല, ഒരു വില തന്ന് വാങ്ങാമെന്ന് പറഞ്ഞു, സേ ഫോർ 50,000. But he did not purchase it, so I was compelled to sell it for 20,000. So there is a difference of 30,000 rupees. And in this case, the court said that the cause of action does not arise on the date of resale, but it would arise on the date of refusal, and the period of limitation will be have to be calculated from the date on which the wrong was done. That's a date of refusal, and it's not on the date the resale was conducted. So I want to have filed the suit computing the limitation from the date on which the defendant had refused to purchase the good from me, and the shortfall can be claimed in that suit, and the period of limitation will run from that date, as held in Bhajan Singh Hardit and Company versus Karen Agency, year 1936, Lahore 344. So that is with regard to the extensions of period of limitation. Now we will have to see a little more area is there, that is with regard to acquisition and extinguishment of proprietary rights. In the next session we will have it. Thank you.